Welcome to this recording of the Activist Lawyer podcast, brought to you from the Granite Podcast Studio in the heart of Newry City. We are delighted that you could join us at Activist Lawyer, where we will be discussing a range of topical matters engaging not only with lawyers, but people who are committed to highlighting and combating injustices and inequalities. We will bring you our thoughts, but invite you to share yours. We'll be looking for contributors to our blog at activistlawyer.com, as we want your perspective as we unravel and unpack a host of issues. My name is Sarah Henry and I'm a solicitor practising in Newry City. I worked with a human rights firm in Dublin for many years and with a number of rights-based organisations and charities. I'm looking forward to meeting some fantastic guests throughout this series. Hi everybody, thank you for joining us today. I'm here with my co-host Jack.
Hello everybody.
Jack is here. And today we have a really great guest on. It is an old colleague of mine and she's actually still my friend through immigration law many years ago. We're joined by Karen Berkeley, who is just really an expert overall in the area of immigration. I worked with Karen many years ago when I joined Berkeley Solicitors human rights practice in Dublin as a young, fresh-faced, interested trainee, and Karen had already qualified and was just flat out in immigration and was so passionate. You could just sense this real. She was very, very inspirational to me and many of the other people who worked there. So Karen has gone on to open her own practice in Dublin.
Yeah.
Berkeley Solicitors, it's in Christchurch. They specialise in immigration, of course, and they're very, very busy. So she's going to take us through some of the interesting cases that she is working on and also some of the points that she has taken before various courts to establish that also affects our work here, Jack, in many ways. You find it interesting yourself, just the conversation?
Yeah, so like you can obviously tell from the podcast when you listen that she's super passionate about the area, and she's went from being a law student, obviously studying law, to now owning her own firm, and I think that's a dream for many. And I think she highlights how her passion for for immigration law, that one specific area of law, helped her through her journey into owning her own firm, which I think is very inspirational, and a lot of people will want to open up their own firms. So I think it'll be a good lesson for any young students. Yeah,
she's a great story behind her. Just a little bit of background. So Karen established Berkeley Solicitors in October 2016, having previously acquired 10 years experience working as an immigration solicitor at Brophy's. She has since expanded her firm to include the current team of 8 staff. Berkeley Solicitors has acted on a number of significant test cases, and we talk about those in recent years, including a successful win on a refugee family reunification case in the Supreme Court in 2019 and a referral to the European Court of Justice in an EU free movement case, which is what we're really interested in as well. Karen also lectures for the Law Society of Ireland on the Certificate of Immigration Law and Practice course and for the Law School's Professional Practice course. She was admitted to the role of solicitors in February 2009 and graduated from the University College Cork in 2002 with a Bachelor of Law degree. I hope you enjoy today's podcast.
Hi Sarah, hi Jack, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Not at all. And listeners know, in our introduction, I'd mentioned that I've known Karen for a very, very long time. And at the start of my career, I think, Karen, you were qualified already when I joined the practice as a trainee, and both of us really I fell into immigration, I suppose, as Nisha. You'd already been practicing in it and human rights cases at the time, including lots of asylum and refugee law. So we're going to just talk about a little bit about your background, maybe introduce yourself to our listeners and maybe give us a little bit of background as to how you got into this very niche and kind of special practice area of law, immigration.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Thanks. Yeah. So, well, I studied law in UCC, and that was a long, long time ago now. I think I finished my degree must have been in 2003. And at the time, I wasn't sure what area of law I wanted to get into. And while I was, I thought at that time I wanted to qualify as a solicitor. I knew I didn't want to work doing conveyancing or maybe the more standard areas of law, but I didn't know what I wanted. So I suppose I headed off travelling, and when I came back from travelling after a couple of years, I had an absolutely passionate interest in the world and meeting people from all over the world. And I started when I came back from traveling. Basically, I started volunteering. I saw that asylum really seemed to interest me, and I thought maybe that was the area I wanted to work in. So I started off volunteering in NASC, and I suppose the very first day I kind of popped into NASC. NASC is a support an NGO in Cork. Doing great work, And I popped in one day on my own and introduced myself and said I was really interested in seeing what they were doing in NASC. And I kind of got a little bit lucky. The legal officer there took time out to talk to me and asked me to come back another day. And I started sitting in on some meetings and helping just as a volunteer. But I was really transformed by my experience. The very first day I went in, I remember it just felt so moved by the work that was happening, by the people who were there. And immediately I just got caught up in this passion for asylum and human rights. And that led me to, then to moving a few months later up to Dublin to do an internship in the Irish Refugee Council. Which it really got me into the whole asylum area, and it was meeting refugees and working with a lot of family reunification applications for refugees. And by that stage, I was really deep into it and very passionate, very much. I knew I had found the area that I loved and that I wanted to use law to meet people, to help people, and so on. And it was very moving experience. You know yourself when you were starting off, it was a very at the beginning, it was very moving and very, So that so that led me into a traineeship, and it was Berkeley Solicitors, which I was very lucky to get into a firm where human rights was the order. There was a lot of human rights work going on. There was asylum work going on, and really interesting cases were happening in Berkeley Solicitors. And I suppose I was just very lucky and happy to get into this area. And I from day one working in Berkeley Solicitors, I was there for 10 years, but from day one I knew I found the right area for me.
Absolutely.
I loved it.
And I mean, you could see that when I joined the firm, you'd already been there. I worked in Brophy's too. And I guess just for listeners, Karen and I have a similar background in that I also interned with the Irish Refugee Council. And I spoke before in the show about being struck by some of the stories and the personal cases that you dealt with at quite a young age, and how it really grasped me, and focused me on just being determined to work in that area. But I was very lucky because when I joined the firm, immigration had already been, established by yourself and another solicitor who was there called Jan Boyle. So, and it was also a very interesting time in the development of immigration law in Ireland around, citizenship, the Free Movement Directive coming in 2004. So we really all worked together at a very, very important time, and we were able to establish our own kind of niche even within immigration law itself. So I will say to listeners, the passion that Karen just mentioned there, and we have had other solicitors like Stephen Kerwin on before from KOD Lyons who works in similar areas. It's so evident, and it was so obvious to me, and it was so lovely to be able to sit and watch other solicitors who are way ahead of me and had been practicing in the area for a longer time, being so passionate. And that includes the barristers that we worked with as well. And so as a group, you were kind of brought into this area of law. It was very niche, very specialised, but everybody was committed and everybody was very passionate. And you still to this day, Karen, I mean, you still have that. And you've moved on now to open your own practice, Berkeley Solicitors in Christchurch. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you transitioned from, I suppose, being an employed solicitor to opening your own firm just to specialise in this area.
Yeah, Sarah. Yeah, it was. I suppose, as you were saying there, it was kind of over the years in Brophy's. I went from working in asylum and housing and other social welfare cases to becoming more specialised just in the area of immigration. And probably EU treaty rights was the area that really appealed to me. Well, we just got a lot of cases and we loved working on the EU treaty rights cases. So we started getting quite niche into immigration. And as far as I know, there was no other firm just working in immigration law in Ireland, and I always had a dream that I would love to set up my own firm as an immigration solicitor. Over the years, I became very specialised in immigration, and I really would have loved and had a dream that I wanted to do that. I didn't know at the time over the years whether or not that would happen, but it was something I would have loved do. And then an opportunity arose, and Berkeley Solicitors, for various reasons, had to close. And I had the opportunity, and it came at a time very unexpected because I was 8 months pregnant at the time. And it was all quite sudden. But,
that's right.
But there you go.
I forgot that little detail.
Yeah, so I just jumped at the opportunity, and I opened my own firm, Berkeley Solicitors, and the wonderful Emer Nugent, my colleague from
Amazing
Berkeley
Emer.
Solicitors.
Yeah, we're familiar with Emer here.
Amazing Emer, we will call her. Yeah, amazing Emer, came with me. And Emer and I we brought probably about 300 clients around that time with us. And it was like a very busy firm from day one, very, very busy firm. It was from the very first day, it was just incredibly busy. And within a few weeks, it was just, the phone never stopped ringing.
I know.
And it still doesn't, so thankfully.
You took the chaos with you.
Well, it's organised.
Organised chaos. But it's fantastic.
Yeah, something like that.
And I mean, that comes from a very, building up a reputation. And there weren't that many firms, when we started off practicing or specialising in immigration at all in Ireland. And I know from working in Northern Ireland 2 years ago, there was a handful of us, but it certainly seems to have grown in both the north and south in terms of, people getting more involved. So Jack is here with us, of course. And Jack is starting out in his career. You're finishing your master's?
Yeah, just have my dissertation to hand in this summer, and then that's me.
So Jack, like us, is starting at a very important kind of crux in immigration law, where we have Brexit and the whole withdrawal agreement and the immigration cases that are coming out of that. So, very often we know as much as each other, and he's not looking at me for any type of direction because it's all so new. So what advice do you have for people like, I suppose, Jack, or do you have any questions for Karen, Jack?
Karen, obviously the people that we speak to in this podcast have been so inspirational, but I think the main point for them making a change is that they've been interested in the area that they go down. So I just wanted to ask you, for any young students, including myself, we kind of concentrate on just getting the degree, getting the master's, and we don't concentrate on what area we're interested in. How important was it that you were interested in the area that you've now created your own firm around? How important is it that you were interested in that specific area?
Oh yeah, Jack, it was vital, because it took, I suppose, a lot of confidence for me to, from the very beginning, to say human rights, asylum is my area that I want to work in, because everybody was looking at me like I was crazy back then.
Yeah.
Certainly in Blackhall, people were like, why are you, that was such an off-the-wall area to work in, and it wasn't established, and immigration was even more niche than then, So I suppose it took a bit of confidence to say, no, this is the area I want to work in. And there was also a general pressure to make sure you get trained up in conveyancing and get good at probate, because you'll always need that to fall back on, that general feeling. Yeah. And I remember saying to Kevin, my old boss, I think I'd prefer not to get trained up too much in that area, because I never want to be able to fall back.
I could imagine you saying that very clearly.
Yeah, I was like, look, let me get as niche and specialised as I like, because I know I love this area. And sure, look, I didn't know what the future held. It certainly was paving a new path, but I loved it so much that I was happy to do that. And also, so for young people getting into the area, it's much more established now, so that's the great thing. Okay, it's much more nowadays. Immigration law is you can learn about it in many of the universities as an academic subject. If there's a textbook, John Stanley has written a very brilliant textbook that you can learn about it. It's there's a lot of things happening in the area. We're setting up the Irish Immigration Lawyers Association at the moment. So that's a professional network that we'll be reaching out to academic institutions and students. There's more opportunities for young people to get work experience in immigration or asylum or human rights areas. Yeah. So I think the whole area is a lot more established. And there's a huge amount of judgments coming out of the High Court and the Court of Appeal and the Superior Court that young people can read about, so that we can learn a lot about it through reading the judgments before you do any work experience. You can learn about it yourself.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot more opportunity now than there was maybe 15 years ago for me starting off, for people to learn about it. It's also the diploma course in the Law Society, which I lecture on. And the Bar Council and the Law Society both have diploma courses in immigration and asylum that people can study.
I mean, there's great support out there for anybody getting into it.
Yeah, there's more opportunity.
Yeah,
that's what I think, more opportunity.
We've had fantastic guests on here when we think of some of the younger lawyers here on who've just qualified and are into either human rights and immigration.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unheard of, 10, 15 years ago. So there's definitely a growth there in the area. But as you say, Karen, there's lots of support there for people to get into it.
Yeah.
And moving on, I suppose you've mentioned a lot of the cases there, and there are interesting judgments. Jack and I had caught up on a few of the Irish citizenship judgments over the last few, I suppose, year or 2 years coming out of the High Court in Dublin. But Karen, your area, you've mentioned was, your specialised area is EU treaty rights. And of course, for listeners, that's the law around free movement of persons within the EU, and you've been very established at working at that for years. Can you give us just a little bit of insight? I know you've been working on a number of cases, one in particular that we might just discuss here to give listeners an idea about the type of work that you do, the Sivan and Ali versus the Minister for Justice and Equality case. I know there were your clients, and you issued proceedings around challenging a refusal of the EU residence card on the basis that, and this might be a little bit niche for listeners, but it's a really, really important case that they're not members of the household of the EU citizen. Can you give us a little bit of background on the outcome of that case, please?
Yeah, sure, Sarah. So I've been working on these this particular type of EU treaty rights case where an EU citizen moves to Ireland to exercise the free movement as a worker or so on, and then they apply for either a visa or a residence card for their family members. And the directive and the 2015 regulations divide family members into two groups. And we have the first group that we call the qualifying family members, which are automatically entitled, if they fall into that group, to join the EU citizen. But there's another group called the permitted family members, and those family members have to go through an assessment, and they have to prove the particular group of family members I'm talking about. We would call it, they have to prove that they are either dependent on the EU citizen or a member of the household of the EU citizen in the country from which they came from, which is the home country of the family member. So if the EU citizen can prove that their family member was dependent or a member of their household in the other country from which the family member came, they also have a right to be accompanied or to be joined by these family members. But this has been quite a contentious and complicated area for many years. And the Department of Justice have refused many of these applications over the years, and in some years even refused all of the applications. And they've refused them on basis that they're not dependent, or they haven't provided sufficient evidence of dependency in the home country, or they haven't provided sufficient evidence of membership of the same household. And over the years, we've been working on these cases for many, many clients. And they've generated a lot of litigation and judicial reviews going to the High Court. And so over the last few years in the High Court in Ireland, there was a holding list, there was a test case for the dependency cases, and that became known as the Kuhn and Can after the Kuhn and Can case. And my case was a test case for membership of the same household. That's the Sivan and Ali case, became the test case to establish what exactly does membership of the same household mean. And the department had refused my clients a residence card because they said, you're not a member of the same household of the EU citizen. And the reason they said that was because they said you didn't prove that the EU citizen was the head of the household in the other country. Now, head of the household was a new legal test that does not appear in the law. So they had added this in as an extra requirement in the decision that it's not legally required to prove you're the head of the household. But we said, as the lawyers for the applicant, they are members of the same household. Here's the evidence. They live together in their home country for many years. And the department said, well, no, you're not. It requires more than proving you lived under the same roof, and something else is required, like head of the household of the EU citizen. So this became the test case for the membership of the same household cases, and it was unsuccessful in the High Court, and it went on to the Court of Appeal, and there was a detailed judgment in the Court of Appeal, and again, the applicants were unsuccessful. The Court of Appeal again said there is something more is needed than living under the roof, same roof, something to do with the centrality of life of the EU citizen, that they have to have this family member living there. Again, adding in, well, in our opinion, adding in maybe another test that doesn't appear in the law. Yeah. So we appealed that to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court heard the case, and it was a very interesting, I suppose in the Supreme Court, the judges required evidence or on affidavit as how are the other EU countries interpreting this phrase, membership of the same household. So we put in an affidavit, and we got 20-something translations of all the different EU countries and how they'd all translated this phrase. And so, there was funny, all the different variations of what does membership of the same household mean. And some were interpreted to say living with the EU citizens. Some were saying, and they all had different variations of it. So in the end, it was clear, even to the Supreme Court, that the phrase membership of the same household isn't, and it hadn't been interpreted by any EU court judgment. So therefore, they made in December 2020, the Supreme Court determined that they needed to make a preliminary reference to the European Court of Justice to ask for an interpretation of this law. So the question that was referred was, can a definition for membership of the same household be provided so that it can be implemented in the EU, in the same way? And if no definition can be provided, then how is a court in a domestic court to interpret and assess these cases? So that was recently enough that the reference was made in December. So it's still pending the European Court, and we're awaiting a decision. We're awaiting a hearing, I should say. Sorry.
It's so interesting. It strikes me on 2 points, really. Number one, the phrase is membership of the household, of the same household, and how that, your affidavit there speaks for itself, and getting all of those translations and interpretations across the member states put forward for that one phrase. But this is typical of the development of the vast array of EU case law. But just zooming in on free movement and how decades of case law has been built up to determine words, interpretation of phrases, etc., etc. And what we're dealing with here, I suppose, in the north, in terms of the whole Brexit and departure from the EU, is a whole unravelling of that law. And we're in a very difficult transitionary period still. I know technically the transition period's over, but it isn't really, because we're still grappling with this phrase itself. We're still dealing, aren't we, Jack, with clients who, have been refused because they're not held as members of the same household, and they would need to have a relevant EEA document, which is a residency card, before they proceed to what's now called the EU settlement scheme. But it's quite sad as well, isn't it, to realise that lawyers, barristers, all of these test cases going forward, preliminary references, rulings from the European Court of Justice as well, and to build up case law that really impacts, your case there could impact thousands and thousands of people, thousands of families. And it's just sad to see that really coming to an end here.
For here, yeah.
But we're still dealing with the aftermath of that. So that's just one example, I guess. And when do you expect that to come through, Karen? Or,
I would say in the next few months we should have a hearing date. I hope in the next few months we'll have a hearing date. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to that.
Yeah,
and I wonder, will it have any bearings here? I'm not sure how that might work, but Jack, it'll be interesting for us to follow up on that.
Definitely.
And just moving away slightly, I know there are other, immigration is so niche, and that's one example there of how kind of specific you can be. But also just looking at the Refugee Act, the 1996 Act, and I know you did a lot previously around family reunification, Karen. You've another case there, which was really recent, wasn't it? I think it was summer last year. MAM Somalia. You might just give our listeners a little bit of background.
Yeah, that was another quite a significant case which we worked on, which ended up with a successful judgment in the Supreme Court last year in 2020. And this case related to a refugee who applied for family reunification under the old law, the 1996 Act, which has more recently been updated to the 2015 International Protection Act. But under the older Act, refugees had an entitlement to apply for family reunification with certain family members. And the case related to the question about whether a refugee still has that right to family reunification when they become a naturalised Irish citizen.
Yes.
Because the department had been for many years had interpreted the law such that a refugee continued to have their right to family reunification after they naturalised. But then they did a complete U-turn, and somewhere in around 2017, they started to refuse any naturalised refugee. They actually deemed their application ineligible because they were now an Irish citizen, and they said, as an Irish citizen, you're not entitled to rely on the refugee law. So a complete U-turn, and there was probably about 100 refugees, maybe around a group of 100 who got refused 2017, 2018 period. So we issued proceedings on many of these cases and challenged the department, and there was about 40 or 50 cases went to the High Court. Mm-hmm. And one of my cases, it was the Nazarova KN, and 2 cases went forward as a test case. One of them was mine, a family from Uzbekistan, and there was a family from Somalia that went forward as the test cases. Mm-hmm. And they went again, lost in the High Court, lost in the Court of Appeal, but they were ultimately successful in the Supreme Court. And I mean, it was a really interesting case in the Supreme Court because the state were arguing that when a refugee becomes an Irish citizen, they're no longer they no longer fit the definition of a refugee because they're not outside of their country of nationality, which is the basic definition of a refugee. Mm-hmm. While we were arguing that even though they're an Irish citizen, they still have nationality of their home country, and they're still outside of that country of nationality, and their family circumstances and their risk of persecution doesn't change. And it became a detailed judgment about statutory interpretation, but ultimately the Supreme Court held firmly and absolutely in favour of the applicants based on statutory interpretation, and they won. So in winning, it was really quite a wonderful and inspiring judgment, and it affected all the families in that holding list in about 50 cases that then we're able to settle, and we've since gone through the process and got family reunification granted for many families. So I'm delighted and very proud of that.
Yeah, I mean, you should be.
I'm delighted for the family.
The issue was always a live one. And it was always so disheartening when somebody, managed to secure their citizenship after waiting for so long. And then lost that right. And I remember dealing with it so often. So that is such a turnaround, huge, and really brings legal certainty to that whole area. So well
and
done.
Karen, you're speaking about a couple of your cases there. And I was just wondering, you're mentioning that it was a test case. Could you explain, to me and to the listeners as well, what do you mean by the case being a test case?
Yeah, sure. Oftentimes when there is a contentious legal point that in immigration or asylum that the department is making a decision to refuse an applicant based on a certain legal ground, and that's a contentious legal ground that as applicant lawyers we feel is maybe not lawful. Oftentimes many applicants issue judicial review proceedings on the same legal point. Yeah. So over the course of a number of years, there could be a growing number of cases going into the High Court all the time on the same legal point. So the procedure here in the High Court is that they don't allow all those cases, like 150 cases on the same point, they don't all go on to a hearing. What happens is the cases go into a holding list, and 1 or 2 or 3 in sometimes cases are chosen by the judge to go forward as a test case. And then the test case will have an impact on all the other cases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So usually if the test case is successful, what usually happens is agreements and arrangements and settlement arrangements are made with the others. Or if the test case is unsuccessful, oftentimes in a test case, it will go on to the higher courts and on to maybe the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court.
I know you have a blog on your website and it details a lot of your success stories and the firm's success stories. But what are you working on at the minute? Is there anything interesting or anything coming up that we should tune into in terms of your case law at the moment? I know you always have something.
Well, actually, Sarah, today is quite an interesting day in our office because we're applying for the first time to bring a case to the European Court of Human Rights, which is an amazing opportunity for us as human rights lawyers. And the case that we're applying to the Court of Human Rights is to do with, again, it's a refugee family reunification case. And it goes back, again, it has a long history. The case concerns a challenge to the new family reunification law that was implemented in the 2015 Act. And in the 2015 Act, Section 56 severely curtails the rights of refugees to apply for family reunification, so much so that a refugee can only apply for a spouse if they were married before the date they applied for protection. Okay. And Section 56 also curtails refugees for applying for family reunification within the first 12 months of the date they get their declaration. So after 12 months, they're absolutely ineligible to apply for even for a child. So these are huge, severe restrictions on the rights of refugees to family reunification, okay? So that over the last few years has resulted in many challenges. And again, there was a tax case that went to the Supreme Court. It was not my case. It was the ASI case. Or there were 3 different cases went to the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court held on against the applicants and upheld the legality of Section 56. And they distinguished these cases from specific judgments from the European Court of Human Rights about Article 8. And they distinguished it from Adzi and Hodi. And the refugees lost. And it was very, very, very disappointing. So we have a brilliant barrister, Michael Lynn, working on one of my cases. And Michael and the other barristers were continuing the fight against this section, and we're going to bring an application for a client to the European Court of Human Rights, arguing a breach of Article 8. So that's what we're working on at the moment.
Fantastic. And I mean, as well, a great legal team. I think a great force to be reckoned with. Michael Lynn there as well, who is, has been fundamental in the development of human rights, specifically within the immigration and refugee law context. So that's so interesting. And we'll definitely keep in touch with you about how you're getting on around that. Yeah. I mean, that's an issue that's been going on, as you said, for a very long time.
Yeah.
So much happening there.
Definitely, Karen. Yeah. And obviously we can't ignore that we're on the Activist Lawyer podcast, Karen. So I just wanted to ask you, how important is activism to you, especially, obviously, you're a solicitor, so I wanted to ask you, how important is activism to you in the face of negative commentary towards the legal profession? And
there's been a lot in the South recently as well, not just here.
Well, we've had such we've had such difficulties in our area over the last few years working with some, I suppose, a kind of an idea that some of the cases going into the High Court are not justified or legitimate or shouldn't have been brought in, or some of the applicants haven't been truthful in their proceedings in the High Court. And this resulted in very strict practice correction being brought into our court, the Asylum and Immigration Court, a couple of years ago, which put huge onus on the applicant solicitors to attend to swear affidavits and to adhere to certain truths that their clients were saying. And that's targeted at our area, not at any other area of any practitioners in law. So that's the kind of but we have to, I suppose, come together as a group of practitioners to try to deal with this and to try to advocate for ourselves and stand up for ourselves. And we have brought our issues to the attention of the Law Society and to the attention of the judges and so on. And we've had many meetings. And all of this has resulted in the formation of an association, which is happening at the moment, the Irish Immigration Lawyers Association, which we are now open for membership, and we're formed a committee to represent ourselves for activism, really, and to be able to stand up for ourselves as a group. And I think that's a huge, great consequence of that we have formed this association.
It's huge, and I'm looking forward to actually joining that group too. And I think it's very, very timely as well. And, it's seeing immigration as a very specialised and very important area of law, which it hadn't really been seen as before. So that's a massive move. And just, I suppose, looking at your background and the passion that got you into where you are at the moment. Activism has always been a part of that, I guess. With, I suppose you did a lot of voluntary work, I know, with Free Legal Advice Centre and other organisations too. Do you think it's all encompassing in terms of, you know, it's not just about showing up at work every day, 9 to 5, you know, doing your job? There's much more to it in terms of, you know, getting to know people, volunteering, attending meetings outside. You know, how, if somebody wants to get into the area or is active around immigration, how would you advise them to, you know, take those steps forward?
Yeah. I would say, and like I did advise any younger person or who's trying to get into this area to start getting out there and meeting people and speaking to people and asking to get work experience in offices, even if it's just for a short while. I think you only get if you ask and you put yourself out there. And I think, as you know, I have met so many great people over the years, and I know it's really hard to get work experience, but I do think having an internship or even something less, even if a couple of weeks just working in an office to start getting experience, gives a great step up if you're going for interviews for a job. I think so. Having the academic background is great, but it really gives you a step up if you have some sort of work experience, and also it helps to just network and meet people and talk to people, you know, to get in there. And I hope in our new association, the Irish Immigration Lawyers Association, we're going to reach out to universities. We're going to try to, you know, I do a few lectures in the Law Society. I do lectures with the PPC1 students who are training to be solicitors, and I tell them all about immigration law and what it is like to work in this area. I could see myself doing that in other law schools around the country, and maybe other solicitors would be open to doing that too, and we can make links with the university. We want to promote our area. We want to encourage young people to learn about it and get into it. We're open to that, and I hope the members of our association might also be open to maybe, you know, doing having people in for work experience and so on. So these are ideas we can explore. Yeah,
it's very exciting. It's really exciting times, and it's great that you and a number of other lawyers are getting together to start that really great work. Well, look, I am just delighted to have had you on. We could talk all day like we usually will, but next time, I think when I see you, hopefully it's over a pint or two in Dublin. And I know we're going to end up talking about work, as we always do, about immigration, etc. But it's been too long, and with lockdown and babies, etc., etc. So I'm dying for a catch up, and it's been great to have you on today. And I know you're so busy, and it sounds like everything's going fantastic. And say hi to Emer for us in the firm. But thank you, Karen, for giving up your time today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Karen.
Listen, and Sarah and Jack, thank you so much for inviting me on. And I just wanted to say you're well done on this podcast. I really enjoyed listening to it. It's been fantastic and really interesting speakers. And it's so great to have the opportunity to hear other people working in the area. It's been, you know, it's been really fantastic. So well done to you two for having such a great podcast.
Thank you
for having me on.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening to this week's episode of the Activist Lawyer Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to listen to any of our previous guests, you can find all of our episodes on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To stay up to date with our upcoming episodes and blog posts, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. We really appreciate all of the support, and we will see you next time on the new episode of Activist Lawyer. Thanks.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service for our team, using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.